Okay, so this is from week 2, and this is seeking.
I've always been fascinated by the concept and the duality of fire. We spend so much of our time trying to prevent it, yet when we actually want it, it can be the most frustrating thing in the world. Think about things like lightning and snowflakes and clouds. These are naturally occurring phenomena that seem quite simplistic, but are actually infinitely complex. When you consider the fact that no two are exactly alike, it's this complexity that forces us to think deeper, not wider. I go on several camping trips a year, and each time I spend most of my evening staring into a fire. People used to call this nature's TV, and if you spend enough time out here, you can actually see why. It's a challenge, though, to actually start a fire with simple ferro rod, steel, very, very wet conditions like we have here in Florida. Something elemental, something fundamental about our relationship to fire and to nature on the whole. The objectives for this module are to identify key elements that are necessary for individuals to devote their lives to the active pursuit of truth, to analyze the costs of such an investigation, and to evaluate the extent to which this kind of investigation is open to all. Dr. David Hackett will introduce us to Henry David Thoreau and his experiences on Walden Pond. Dr. Hackett will talk about the essential role of imagination and sense of place in our relationship with nature, and the paradox of truth, especially as it relates to our public and private lives. We will read an excerpt from Walden itself about Thoreau's reason for embracing a Spartan life and delving into the deepest corners of life. Dr. Hackett will return to discuss the Four Noble Truths and talk about what religion is and how a spiritual journey is practiced by all religions as we seek a deeper understanding of who we are. We will examine the life of the Buddha and the concept of enlightenment. We will see what role suffering plays in Buddhism and draw parallels between the Buddha and the protagonist in the novel of the same name, Siddhartha. The National Geographic video Inside Mecca will introduce us to the annual pilgrimage of Muslims to Mecca, a mandatory journey that must be undertaken at least once in one's lifetime. And finally, Hermann Hesse's fictional novel Siddhartha will tell the story of one man's search for enlightenment, his spiritual fulfillment achieved in meditative solitude or a marriage with children. Is it even possible, especially in this day and age, to truly disengage with the material aspects of society and live a life away from it all? In the discussion this week, I will ask you to examine what you believe the cost of the good life is in one aspect of your life. Don't forget to look at the due date and time for this week's discussion post. A few other items to remember. This module is 2 weeks, but please don't wait until the last minute to complete the assignments. Every time I come out here, I'm actually tempted to stay. I have to ask myself, do I really need all that stuff? Do I really need all the Facebooks, the Instagrams, and the Snapchats, and all that stuff? Do I really need all of those distractions? I don't know. I guess everybody has to answer that for themselves. I just know that when I finally get this thing lit, everything seems okay just for the moment.
Okay, so these are the notes. These are going to be your headings over here. And that's where each of the sets of notes will come in.
Human connection with nature is necessary for intellectual and moral stability. Thoreau was most well known for the autobiographical chants a palace or temple on the earth. And then he says, and at length, the middle-aged man concludes to build a woodshed with them. Something happens to the imagination as we grow older. How many of you at some point when you were smaller imagined that someday you were going to become president? I did that. Did any of you guys do that? Think about that. You have the, and you have, and perhaps you still have these schemes, these dreams of how your
Something like
life's
that.
going to turn out. All right? And which is not to say it's not going to turn out that way. But there seems to be some settling, some moral compromise, some,
Resettling
okay,
is
I guess
another
I'll be a
theme
physician's assistant,
we
right?
talked
Which is
about.
fine. All right, but not or something like that, some lowering of expectations.
With jobs.
All right,
and
that is
jobs.
damaging to the imagination. A willingness to, an unwillingness to dream big, dream small. Okay, this is something that Thoreau says often to people as they get older. It doesn't have to happen. Thoreau's Walden is a lengthy meditation that questions what the world has come to believe is the good life. Rather than offering real fulfillment, he says that our life is frittered away in details. The many inventions we have created are but pretty toys which distract our attention from serious things. They are but improved means to an unimproved end. Again, this illusion of a fulfilled life marked by endless activity and electronic toys. He tells us to simplify.
It's funny they talk
Simplify.
about electronics and
As he puts it, and this is a famous line, why should we be in such desperate haste to succeed and in such desperate enterprises? If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. I hope you've heard that. It's a consonant. He hears a different drummer. So Thoreau's different drummer takes him to Walden, where he says there was pasture enough for my imagination. Pasture enough for my imagination. At the University of Florida, is there pasture enough for your imagination? Here he says he learned how to keep himself awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn. If we were to all go out into the woods together, everybody gets their own cabin, someplace separate from one another. I mean, I think in the first day or so, we would freak out, completely freak out, because we don't have all our stuff with us, all right? But the idea is to kind of detox from that, as Thoreau says, and begin to relax into it, and all of a sudden you can begin to see your life somewhat differently. Or a more prosaic way of doing this, you guys get out of this culture, go any place, okay? It forces you to imagine your lives differently. It's a different world, you know? It's a different reality, and it forces us to begin to
This talks about
have
elimination
more
right
pasture
there when he's
for our
talking about
imagination.
women.
Here at Walden, Thoreau
Mhm.
says, the purpose
Boards.
is not to create things, but to affect the quality of the day. Thoreau tells us that I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, to discover that I had not lived. That's a haunting line.
That really
When
is
it comes to
similar
die,
to
to discover that you have not lived.
That could be totally just
There's a
like
bunch
Steve
of people
Jobs.
who decide to go to law school in the second semester of their senior year. You guys know what you need to get into law school? You know the basics? It's a GPA. It's not a GPA in basket weaving, okay? It's a GPA, and do well on that LSAT test, okay? You guys are good at taking tests. You can all of a sudden, whatever your major is, up and decide to go to law school, all right, in the second semester of your senior year. Now, you guys who are actually thinking about going to law school, you say, well, I need this internship. I understand that. But if you're smart, you got a high GPA, you do well on the LSAT, you can go to law school. This often has been, not to diss on law school, okay, but this often has been a default decision for people, that I'm smart, and I'm good at achieving, let me go to the next thing and start achieving and going to law school. And there are people who then go to law school, and they achieve well, all right? And then they become lawyers, and come about age 35 or so they blow up. They blow up because this is not what I want to do. It's just I chose this because I'm smart, all right? And eventually, you know, this is the midlife crisis stuff. There's this, okay, this thought, this imagination that I had early on, and I stayed in this track, really has provided, that's the only thing I could imagine, so I did it, but I don't like it. I'm unhappy with this. The imagination was wounded, was narrow, was not allowed, there was not sufficient pasture for it.
Okay, so you can tie all of that to
I want to discover
third noble truth.
that I lived, or say that I lived before I die. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of my life. Now, it's not possible for all of us to go off to Walden and live as Thoreau. However, it's possible to discern from Thoreau's experience some abiding principles that might help us all to live the good life that he envisioned. So what do we make of Thoreau? Let me suggest a few things that Thoreau would like us to think about. One thing he wants us to think about is this idea of a sense of place. In that constructing assignment that you did, you talked about having a certain place, a certain sacred place. He also talks about a relationship with nature, some obedience to the process of change and growth within the context of knowing your environment. You guys notice palm trees around Gainesville? Seen palm trees? Yeah? It's weird.
Is going to be...
You know why it's weird? They're not indigenous. They bring those palm trees in. I don't know why they bring those palm trees in, but they're not from here, okay? You're in a different climate zone. You guys who came here from the south, from Miami, you're in a different climate zone. You must be aware of that. It's somewhat different here, okay? In other words, some attention to the natural environment, knowing what's here and what's not here, being aware, of the seasons.
Oh yeah, this goes
so
to the
a sense of place, a relationship
constant,
with nature, and particularly this idea of being rooted in a place.
Is change, and you can parallel that
there's
too.
This is kind of I just heard the other day about a church in Oregon in which all the people in the church have made a commitment to stay in that community and not leave no matter what. That they will covenant with one another and stay there. Okay? That we're not going to move from one place to another. Imagine doing that, saying that the average American moves how many times in 5 years? If I were to quiz you guys how many times you've moved in your life, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 times. You guys who are still in the same bedroom that they brought you home from the hospital in? Anybody? Really? It's great. That's great, okay? But that's rare. And Thoreau seems to think that being part of a place, staying in a place, is a good idea. He also says there needs to be a consistency between private and public values. In other words,